There is a diplomatic front in this war that almost nobody is taking seriously enough. Not the military front, not the energy front, not the shipping front, a diplomatic front. And one of the strangest developments in that front is not happening in Tehran, Washington, or Brussels. It is happening in Buenos Aires. Because a country with no military role, no geographic exposure, and no meaningful influence over the battlefield has still managed to place itself directly into the line of diplomatic fire. And now, the consequences are beginning to take shape. Iran has issued a formal warning to Argentina, not through leaks, not through social media, through official diplomatic channels. That matters, because this is not just a story about one country offending another. It is a story about what happens when ideological foreign policy collides with economic fragility, and when rhetorical alignment is mistaken for real leverage. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because this is the kind of story that gets split into disconnected headlines. A protest here, a speech there, a trade risk somewhere else. But these are not separate events. They are one system, and if you don't connect them, you miss the real point. So let's start with the basic question. How did Argentina get here? How does a country with no operational role in this conflict end up receiving a direct warning from Iran? The answer is not military. It is political. For decades, Argentina followed a consistent instinct in foreign policy: caution outside its region. Not because it lacked opinions, but because it understood its position. A country with recurring debt crises, structural inflation, and dependence on exports has more to gain from flexibility than confrontation. More to gain from open channels than symbolic fights. More to gain from neutrality than ideological overcommitment. That was strategic realism. And it has now been replaced with something far riskier. The current government has not just aligned with the American and Israeli position, it has advertised that alignment loudly. Iran has been labeled an enemy. The IRGC has been classified as a terrorist organization. Argentina voted against a Gaza ceasefire. And the president has made public declarations that go beyond diplomacy into personal ideological identity. This is the key point. This alignment was not forced. It was not necessary. It was volunteered. And voluntary alignment is judged differently. When a country is pressured into a position, others understand necessity. But when a country inserts itself eagerly into a conflict it cannot influence, it is seen as intentional and revealing. That is why Iran's response is not just anger, it is analysis. The message does three things. It labels Argentina's posture as hostile. It accuses it of aligning with aggression. And most importantly, it warns of consequences at the international level. That last part matters most. Because in diplomacy, consequences are signals. They mean, your behavior is now entering calculations beyond this dispute. Now, to understand this fully, you have to include history. Argentina's relationship with Iran is not abstract. It includes trauma. The 1992 embassy bombing, the 1994 AMIA attack. These events shaped national memory and created lasting distrust. That context matters. It explains why a hard line against Iran has domestic resonance. But history is not strategy. A grievance does not automatically justify every policy built on top of it. The real question is not whether Argentina has reasons to distrust Iran. The question is whether turning that distrust into active alignment in a live war serves Argentina's interests today. And when you look at the reality, the answer becomes difficult to avoid. No military role, no leverage, no influence over outcomes, no place at negotiation tables. But what Argentina does have is exposure. Exposure through trade, exposure through financing, exposure through reputation, exposure through diplomacy. And that is what makes this posture so strange. It is the behavior of a country acting as if it has geopolitical surplus, when in reality it has very little margin. So why do it? The answer is domestic politics. When governments face pressure at home, foreign policy can become a tool A distant conflict can become a moral narrative. An external enemy can become a symbol. And suddenly the conversation shifts from inflation to ideology, from economic pain to moral positioning. Argentina's domestic situation makes this dynamic very relevant. High inflation, high poverty, structural economic pressure. In that environment, a loud foreign policy stance can serve a purpose. It redirects attention. It reframes debate. It creates a narrative of strength. That does not mean the policy is fake. It means we should ask what political function it serves. And in this case, it serves domestic narrative more than strategic interest. Now let's talk about cost. Argentina is an export-driven economy. Agriculture is central. Markets matter. Buyers matter. Reputation matters. Iran itself has been a relevant agricultural market. And even without immediate sanctions, hostility changes opportunity. Trade is never fully separate from politics. And beyond Iran, there is a wider issue. Iran is part of a broader geopolitical network. It connects with Russia, China, and BRICS. Argentina, meanwhile, needs investment, financing, and access. It previously had an opening toward BRICS and reversed course. That reversal matters, because in global politics, consistency builds trust. Inconsistency creates hesitation. Will major powers retaliate dramatically? Probably not. But that is not how consequences usually work. They work through friction. Rooms become colder. Deals become narrower. Flexibility decreases. Goodwill fades. And when future negotiations happen, those memories remain. That is why weaker states need careful diplomacy more than strong ones. A strong state can absorb mistakes. A weak state cannot. And Argentina right now has very little margin. Now compare this with other countries. Across the Americas and Europe, even stronger states are trying to reduce exposure. Canada is cautious. Brazil is measured. Mexico avoids confrontation. Even countries aligned with major powers are trying to preserve flexibility. The global instinct is simple. Stay out. Minimize exposure. Keep options open. Argentina chose the opposite. And it did so at a moment when even its closest allies are trying to manage escalation carefully. That is the irony. Argentina is showing more ideological intensity than the powers it is aligning with. That is not strategic value. That is overperformance. And overperformance without leverage is dangerous. There is a perfect example of this. The idea that Argentina could replace energy flows for Europe in a crisis. That is not serious policy. It is political theater. Europe's energy system is complex. No serious planner sees Argentina as a substitute for disruptions affecting global supply routes. Statements like that do not build credibility. They weaken it. And credibility matters. Because diplomacy is not just about being heard. It is about being taken seriously. When a government begins to sound performative rather than strategic, other states discount it. And being discounted is costly, especially for an economically fragile country. So what do consequences actually look like? Not war, not invasion. Friction. Friction in trade, friction in diplomacy, friction in negotiations, friction in access and influence. Iran can complicate things directly and indirectly. It can oppose Argentina in forums. It can shape how others respond to Argentine initiatives. It can become a spoiler. And for a country already under economic pressure, more friction is the last thing it needs. That is the core mistake. Ideology has been turned into exposure. A loud position was chosen where neutrality would have been cheaper, safer, and smarter. And the only clear benefit is domestic political narrative. That is not strategy. That is performance. Argentina once had a foreign policy tradition better suited to its reality. Caution, non-alignment, flexibility. It was not glamorous, but it worked. It protected trade. It preserved options. It avoided unnecessary conflicts. That reputation took years to build. It can be spent very quickly. And that is what is happening now. Argentina is not shaping the war. It is not influencing outcomes. It is not gaining leverage. It is sacrificing neutrality for symbolism and risking economic consequences for a posture that mainly serves domestic image. That is a bad trade, and it carries a broader lesson. In unstable global environments, governments that turn foreign policy into ideological theater usually pay more than they expect, especially if they lack the power to shape outcomes or absorb retaliation. Foreign policy is not branding. It is not performance. It is about protecting interests and managing risk. When it stops doing that, the applause at home can become very expensive, because the real damage often comes later. When governments need financing, when they need trade access, when they need flexibility. That is when reputational memory matters. Prestige with one side does not guarantee support when the bills come due. Markets still demand confidence. Institutions still demand discipline. Partners still demand reliability. And right now, Argentina is sending mixed signals. The gain here is rhetorical. The cost is structural. And structural costs last. They show up in trade uncertainty, investor hesitation, diplomatic distance, and in how other countries classify your government. Serious or performative, strategic or impulsive. That classification matters more than headlines because diplomacy runs on expectations. And when expectations weaken, relationships become conditional. That is another kind of consequence. Not dramatic, but real. And perhaps the most revealing part is this. Argentina had other options. It could have maintained its position without becoming a frontline participant. It could have preserved moral language without sacrificing strategic caution. It could have kept its options open. Instead, it chose a performance of alignment. And performances end. Consequences usually don't. So here is where things stand. Argentina inserted itself into a distant conflict. It did so voluntarily. It did so loudly. Iran responded. And now an already fragile economy faces unnecessary diplomatic strain. That is the real story. Not just that Iran is angry, but that foreign policy is being used as a political instrument, and the cost is being transferred to the country itself. This is not just a bilateral issue. It is a case study in how ideological overreach collides with economic weakness, and why that combination is dangerous. Subscribe now if you want analysis that goes beyond headlines and explains the structure underneath stories like this. And before you go, leave one question in the comments. How much economic risk should a country take for a foreign policy performance it never needed to stage?